Before I ever photographed a wedding, before I ever owned a digital camera, and before I ever knew what aperture priority even meant, I was in a dark basement, not hiding, but learning, threading 8mm film through a projector, cutting reels by hand, splicing stories together with tape, drawing directly on the film itself to create visual effects. Long before Lightroom, long before mirrorless cameras, and long before Instagram trends, I learned to see light passing across celluloid, and I think that explains a lot about how I shoot today. This is Ken Clough, and you're listening to In Focus with Ken Clough Photography. And today's episode is called What Cinematography Taught Me About Photography. The Basement Filmmaker. When I was a teenager, I was drawn to motion, not snapshots, not posed images, but motion. I had an 8mm camera. I would film little scenes in our basement, experimenting with angles, movement, and pacing. But what shaped me most wasn't just filming. It was editing. There was no software, no timeline to drag clips around, no undo button. You physically held the film. You cut it with a splicer. You taped one piece of story to another. You learned pacing by feel. When you slice film manually, you understand time differently. You feel the cut. You see how two pieces of story collide. You see how shortening a moment by a few frames changes emotional rhythm. Editing wasn't abstract. It was tactile. Sometimes, just to experiment, I would draw on the film strip, scratch patterns into it, add marks and shapes, primitive special effects. When the projector light hit those scratches, the image transformed. That was an early lesson. Light is not neutral. Light is expressive. Even then, in a basement, I was learning that storytelling wasn't about recording events. It was about shaping how light reveals them. The projection booth at Syracuse University. Years later, I found myself in another dark room. High above an auditorium at Syracuse University, I was a projectionist. If you've never been inside a projection booth, it's mechanical and precise. Metal platters, threaded film, heat from the lamp housing, the steady hum of machinery. We didn't just pop in a reel and press play. We used 5,000-foot platter systems. That meant carefully splicing massive reels together to create a seamless feature-length film before the audience ever arrived. You handled hours of story at once. If a splice failed, the audience saw it. If a reel snapped, it was on you. If a frame burned, you noticed. Running a feature film carried responsibility, but it also carried education. I projected films for campus showings and for classes at the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications. Classic films, art films, and experimental films. And when you watch great films repeatedly, something shifts. You stop just watching stories. You start studying decisions. Why was that scene framed wide? Why did the director hold that shot longer than expected? Why does that empty space feel so heavy? I wasn't enrolled in a cinematography class, but in that booth, weekend after weekend, I received a master class anyway. Wide cinematic composition. One of the most important lessons I observed was scale. Cinematography isn't just about composition. It's about cinematic composition. Wide frames that breathe, environment as character, negative space carrying emotional weight. I remember the long, deliberate opening scene of Citizen Kane. The camera passes slowly, setting tone before dialogue explains anything. You're invited into atmosphere. That stayed with me. When I photograph today, I'm not just looking at a subject. I'm looking at the scene. The edges matter. The air around the person matters. The balance across the frame matters. I want the image to feel like it continues beyond its borders. That instinct was formed long before digital photography. It was shaped by watching how masters built tension visually before a single word was ever spoken. Movement Before moment. Film trains your brain to think in movement. Even when I'm shooting stills, I'm thinking, what just happened? What is about to happen? Where is the energy moving? Photography freezes a moment, but cinematic thinking looks for motion inside that freeze. Anticipation, release, breath. A photograph can feel static, or it can feel like a frame pulled from a larger unfolding story. That difference is subtle, but it matters. Film taught me to see time. Photography allows me to distill it. Shooting 16:9 intentionally. Recently, at a bridal show, I was talking with a few other photographers about style and framing. I mentioned that I often set my camera to shoot in 16:9 aspect ratio. There was a pause. Really? For those unfamiliar with aspect ratios, 16:9 is the wide format you typically see in movies and in modern television. It's that cinematic rectangle, wider than it is tall. It stretches horizontally, giving space for environment and movement. Traditional still photography is usually shot in a 3:2 ratio, slightly taller in feel. Many photographers shoot that default format and decide later how to crop. I compose in 16:9 in the camera, not later, but in the moment, because that wide frame changes how you see. It forces you to think horizontally, to balance left and right, and to respect negative space. When you shoot wide, you can't just center a subject and call it done. The empty area matters. The direction of light matters. The scene becomes part of the story. In many ways, it feels less like taking a photograph and more like pulling a still from a feature film. And that way of seeing traces back to projection booths and basement editing tables. It isn't a trend, it's my lineage. Stillness that feels like motion. Some of the most powerful moments in cinema are quiet. A character alone in a room, a long pause before dialogue, a frame that holds just a little bit longer than expected. That stillness isn't empty, it's charged. I'm drawn to that kind of frame. Images that feel calm but alive. Images that suggest motion without showing it. When someone describes my work as cinematic, I don't think about filters or color grading. I think about pacing, restraint, allowing space inside the frame, letting the wide composition breathe. That instinct was shaped in darkness, in rooms where light defined everything. It was always there. It's no accident that I'm drawn to cinematic photography today. I didn't discover it through social media. I didn't adopt it because it was fashionable. It formed me as a teenager splicing film reels in my basement, as a college projectionist threading 5,000-foot platters at Syracuse University, as someone who spent weekends in a booth high above an auditorium watching masters shape emotion through framing and light. Cinematography taught me light carries mood, wide frames carry context, stillness carries weight, movement creates anticipation, restraint creates elegance. Photography is different from film, but the mindset translates. When I raise my camera today, I'm not just thinking about exposure. I'm thinking about scene, atmosphere, breathing room, the width of the frame, how the image holds across space, from left edge to right edge, the way a film frame does. As the lights dim, I learned to see in the dark, in a basement with 8mm reels stretched across the table, in a projection booth at Syracuse University, watching light pass through celluloid onto a wide screen. There's something about that moment in a theater, when the lights begin to dim, the noise softens, the world narrows, and the frame widens. You settle in. You prepare to see. That's still how I approach photography. When I lift the camera, I'm not just looking for exposure or sharpness. I'm looking for atmosphere, for breath across a wide frame, for the quiet tension before motion, for the way light shapes emotion from edge to edge, the way it does in a 16 by 9 cinematic scene. The tools have changed. The reels are digital now, but the thinking hasn't. And maybe that's why my work feels cinematic. Not because I'm imitating movies, but because I learned to see when the lights dimmed and the story began. This is Ken Clough, and this has been In Focus with Ken Clough Photography. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and stay in focus.